Before the story begins, I want to say one thing. My mother has been working in an office for many years, and I know all too well how things work there. This is not just a story for the sake of views, nor this fiction for the sake of content. This is a real-life experience compiled into one story, so that you can recognize yourself, draw conclusions, and avoid repeating other people's mistakes. All company names, and addresses have been changed to the fictitious one. You'll understand why.
The slap didn't sting nearly as much as the silence that followed. You ever been in a room full of people who pretend they didn't see something just because it makes them uncomfortable? That's what this was. A sea of silk blouses, rented tuxes, and fake laughs. All of it paused like someone had pressed mute on the remote. I hadn't even gotten a full plate yet. Just walked past this woman, brushed her shoulder maybe, God forbid, and next thing I know, her ring hand is connecting with my cheek like we're in some turn-of-the-century parlor brawl. "Watch where you're going, you nobody," she snapped, like I'd spilled red wine on her pearls. She wasn't drunk. Don't give her that grace. Her eyes were too sharp for that. Cold. Like she'd been waiting to deliver that line for years. A few gasps, one broken laugh near the dessert tray. Then everyone went stiff, the kind of stiff that says, "This is messy, and I don't get paid enough to care." That's when HR came jogging, heels clacking like she'd trained for this exact moment. "Sir," she said, "sir, not ma'am. Please step outside immediately." I blinked at her, stunned, because, first of all, I'm a woman. Second, did I just get publicly assaulted in front of regional partners and vendors and someone's emotional support peacock of a husband? But then he appeared, my boss, Curtis, shoulders tight, mouth pinched like he was suppressing a yawn, and standing next to him, smiling just a little too calmly, was Slappy McQueen herself. "You're lucky she doesn't press charges," he said. Press charges? I was the one who got struck, not the other way around. Either apologize to my mother or clear your desk. There it was. I wish I could say I gave a fiery speech, made a scene, flipped a tray of champagne flutes just for drama, but I didn't. I just looked at him, at her, at all the people pretending to text under the table or suddenly fascinated by the floral centerpiece. Then I turned around and walked out. Slow, quiet, dignified. Hey, real quick, before we go deeper, if you're listening and haven't hit that subscribe button, do it now. 97% of people listen without subscribing, and it really helps the team keep stories like this coming. Toss a like too if you've ever fantasized about turning the tables on someone who thought you were replaceable. All right, back to it. Outside, the air bit down hard. It was the kind of December cold that made your eyes water if you stood still too long. But I wasn't crying. Hell no. My face was still stinging from that slap, but my pride? My pride was ice cold and wide awake. I didn't grab my coat from the rack, didn't wait for valet. I just started walking. Because when the woman who pays the salaries gets mistaken for the help, and when her boss, her junior, really, if we're talking equity and not egos, tells her to grovel for an invitation to stay, the only thing left to do is let them find out the hard way what happens when the ghost on the payroll stops playing dead. And trust me, I had receipts. They just didn't know who really owned the damn building. 5 years back, this whole circus of a company was nothing more than 4 rented cubicles sandwiched between a vape shop and a strip mall chiropractor who wore Crocs to work. There were no titles, no departments, no boardroom crystal, just caffeine breath, wild ambition, and a busted printer we all pretended wasn't leaking toner like an open wound. That's when I came in, not with fanfare, not with some TED Talk resume. I came in with cash, quiet cash. My own savings, sure, but the real muscle came through Kessler Bridge Holdings. A trust so dry and dull on paper it might as well have been named after a tax return. Nobody asked who Kessler was. They just cashed the checks. I didn't want power by applause. I wanted leverage without noise. So I set it up clean, layered ownership, operating agreements signed with notaries who didn't blink twice, preferred shares with embedded veto rights. I knew better than to make myself the face of anything. Faces get blamed when the ship tips. I wanted to own the water. They called me an operations consultant on the org chart and thought it was a courtesy title. Truth was, I had more pull than Curtis, more than the other founders combined. Every quarter, they'd pat themselves on the back for raising another round, not realizing that round came straight through my holding entity's back channel. And I liked it that way. See, men like Curtis, they don't notice the hands that feed them when the fingers are manicured and the voice doesn't interrupt. He assumed money just appeared, that checks just cleared, that the lights stayed on because he networked well at expos. What he didn't see were the margins I protected, the suppliers I renegotiated, the backroom cleanup I did after his so-called visionary decisions cratered timelines. The irony? That dinner invitation, the one where his mom slapped me into the next tax bracket, it listed me as a consultant, not partner, not board member, just consultant. Like I was someone they called once a quarter to lecture about efficiency ratios. That's the beauty of staying in the shadows. When people forget you're there, they don't see you coming. I had access to every financial system, every contract archive, every compliance log. Not because I assayed, because I built the protocol that governed who could see what. And when Curtis got promoted to CEO, he signed a document titled Operational Delegation Agreement, Class B Amendments, without reading past the third bullet. That bullet? It gave Kessler Bridge final say on executive appointments, pending a material misconduct response, which was just fancy legalese for, if anyone acts like a clown and stains the reputation of the firm, I get to pull the rug. So when HR told me to step outside immediately, they were unknowingly ejecting the woman who kept the place from collapsing during 2 different cash flow crises, 3 near legal disputes, and 1 almost SEC investigation Curtis still doesn't know I fixed. They thought I was background noise. They forgot I wrote the sheet music. I didn't rage. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even slam the door on my way out. That would have given them too much credit, like their little slap fest warranted an emotional meltdown. No, I walked out like I was just stepping away to take a call. Not because I wasn't furious. I was. But anger's cheap. Precision costs more, and it pays in dividends. By the time I got home, the cold had sobered me clean. I peeled off my heels, threw my coat over the kitchen chair, and poured 2 fingers of Lagavulin into a glass that hadn't seen daylight in months. Then I sat down at my dining table, flipped open the partnership binder I kept in a fireproof lockbox, and turned to the tab marked Governance Remedies. Page 42. Material Misconduct Response Protocol. Paragraph 2. Subclause D. I'd written it myself, with enough legal ambiguity to keep the clause quiet, but enough firepower to use it like a guillotine if needed. The phrasing was deliberate. Should any executive, officer, or authorized representative of the company act in a manner that may bring reputational, operational, or legal risk to the trust, its members, or its subsidiaries, the controlling interest shall be entitled to initiate immediate suspension of delegated authority pending board review. In normal people terms, if someone humiliates me publicly and I own their paycheck pipeline, I can hit pause on their little kingdom. And they signed it 3 years ago, without a blink, back when they were too busy trying to land their first round of Series B funding to notice a clause wrapped in $5 vocabulary. So I drafted the emergency filing. Resolution 202B. Subject: Executive Conduct Breach. I cited the event at the dinner, the company's brand reputation risk, and the clause in full. I included screenshots from vendor social media accounts that had already started circulating a clip of the slap heard round the shrimp platter, hashtagged, filtered, commented on. One caption read, CEO lets mommy do the dirty work. Stay classy, Stratwood. I attached everything, time-stamped it, digitally signed it. Then I sent it to our legal proxy service with instructions to deliver physical copies to each board member's home via overnight courier. Priority signature required. No email chains, no Slack messages. Paper, ink, signatures. I checked the tracking numbers, made sure every envelope was en route. Then I sat back, drained the glass, and stared out the window like a widow waiting for a storm to roll in. No calls, no texts, just the quiet hum of systems doing exactly what I built them to do. Curtis thought he'd watched me walk away, but he never saw the switch I flipped on my way out. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the elevator doors dinged open on the 15th floor like nothing had happened. The usual Monday shuffle began. Venti coffees, half-hearted morning nods, the sound of dress shoes on polished concrete. But this time, something was off. You could feel it in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the sky holds its breath. The boardroom doors were locked. Not just shut, locked. The kind of locked that made Curtis pull out his access badge 3 times like maybe the system was glitching, not realizing that the override codes had been changed overnight. I'd made sure of that. The internal IT contact we retained for our legal service, quiet guy named Marvin, ran the change order before sunrise. Standing beside the doors was a woman in a navy sheath dress holding a stack of thick, sealed envelopes. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't apologizing either. Curtis, of course, led the charge. HR Director Marla followed behind him, already checking her phone like she had 10 messages from legal and none of them made sense. "What's this?" Curtis asked the woman. She held out the top envelope. "Delivery for Curtis Trent. Internal memo. Please sign here." He took the envelope, squinted at the label, then looked back at her. "From who?" She glanced down at the delivery manifest. "Kessler Bridge Holdings. As listed, the primary stakeholder." He blinked like he'd just heard a stranger call his mother by her maiden name. Around them, the noise in the hallway changed. It didn't get louder. It got thinner. People still moved, but slower. Heads turned, glances got exchanged, whispers curled behind cupped hands. Curtis tore open the envelope with the same grace he handled performance reviews. Aggressive, defensive, and half blind to context. He skimmed, flipped, frowned. "What does this mean? Temporary suspension of what? Who signed this?" The paralegal repeated, like she was explaining it to a child. "Your executive authority has been suspended pending board review of conduct impacting the controlling interest." She gestured to the clause. "It's all here, cited under the Material Misconduct Response Protocol as signed in 2020. "Wait, who approved this?" he asked again. Louder now, as if raising his voice would redraw the chain of command. She didn't even blink. "Kessler Bridge Holdings," she said again. "Primary stakeholder, with voting rights and controlling equity as defined in Article 3. He turned to Marla, like she might have some loophole in her purse, but Marla's envelope was already open. Her eyes darted across the document. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked smaller by the second, like someone realizing the floor plan was actually a trap. That's when the rest of the C-suite started arriving. One by one, each greeted not with a cheery good morning, but with the same envelope. One by one, the panic widened. No one screamed. No one cried. But you could see it in their faces. That ripple of recognition when the power they thought was permanent turns out to be leased, and the leaseholder just changed the locks. Meanwhile, back in my kitchen, I was sipping a second cup of coffee, flipping through a dog-eared paperback I hadn't had time to finish since February. My phone was off. My inbox was set to auto-reply. The world could spin without me for one more day. Let them wonder. Let them stew. Let them finally read the agreements they signed in a rush for growth. The engine doesn't need to scream to move the car. Sometimes it just shifts gears. Quietly. Cleanly, and if you're the one holding the transmission, no one hears the change until they feel it. By noon, the whisper trail had caught fire. Most of the staff didn't know what was going on, just that the leadership floor had gone dark and everyone who normally barked orders looked like they'd seen their credit score drop by 300 points overnight. Meanwhile, the board chair, Alan Foster, a man who once told me I was refreshingly background, was in full damage control mode. He didn't call my assistant. He didn't send an email. He called me directly. From his personal line, that told me everything I needed to know. His voice was different. None of the usual over-polished legalese or fake warmth. Just quiet panic wrapped in faux professionalism. We didn't realize Kessler Bridge had controlling weight, he said, like the words tasted like rust on his tongue. I let the silence sit for a second, just long enough for him to hear how stupid that sounded. "You weren't supposed to," I said calmly. "That's what made it work. Because the thing is, people like Alan and Curtis spend so much time fighting to be the loudest in the room. They forget someone had to book the room, pay for it, and sign the lease. And in this case, that someone was me." I told him I'd already submitted my notarized voting packet for the emergency resolution. I knew how this would go. Board procedure required a 48-hour window for informal discussion before votes were tallied, but the presence of immediate reputational harm triggered a fast-track clause. Another one they signed. Another one they forgot. The irony of people trying to outmaneuver bylaws they never bothered reading. I also added a memo, just one sentence. Loss of decorum can signal deeper risks. That line hit harder than anything else, because while Curtis thought his mother's slap was just an awkward moment at a holiday dinner, the optics were a liability grenade. If clients saw it, if media picked it up, if even one vendor asked for clarification on the chain of command, it could ripple into something bigger. Alan tried to pivot. Look, obviously we'll be reviewing conduct, but I don't think an immediate removal is... Alan, I said, this isn't emotional, this is procedural. He went quiet. That's the problem with men like him. They want to lead until leadership means dealing with the fine print. Until someone hands them a contract, they actually have to obey instead of edit. He ended the call by saying he'd keep me updated. I didn't need updates. I had the protocol. I had the votes. And more importantly, I had the signatures. Every single one. Signed, dated, and indexed in a folder labeled Break Glass Only. Curtis could keep pacing his glass office. Marla could keep refreshing her inbox, hoping for HR salvation. But the truth had already been documented. Long ago. Quietly. Legally. There's no loyalty in business. There's only leverage. And I'd never forgotten where mine was stored. They gathered in the main boardroom just after 3 p.m. Blinds drawn, no catered lunch, no small talk. Just thick folders, tight brows, and the low hum of consequences catching up. No Curtis, no Marla. The executive floor had been quarantined electronically, legally, and socially. Their badges no longer worked on keycard entries. Their names were ghosted from the digital org chart. Internally, they still held their titles. But today, in that room, they were already gone. Alan chaired the meeting. His voice was flatter than usual. Maybe it was shame, maybe indigestion. He walked through the packet like it was radioactive, scanning over screenshots from the dinner, media traction reports, a summary of the trust's controlling interest, and of course, the clause. The clause they all signed. The one with my initials in the margin and a notary stamp that had quietly aged like a fine wine. Nobody argued. Not one person said, "This feels too harsh." Nobody defended Curtis, and Marla didn't even get a mention beyond her title. They all knew this wasn't about a slap. It was about forgetting who held the oxygen line while they played Empire. They spent 20 minutes reviewing, but I knew what they were really doing. Stalling, hoping someone else would speak first, praying someone had a better option, but no one did, because there wasn't one. Then Alan cleared his throat and said, "Per governance protocol, we'll proceed to vote on the emergency resolution outlined in 202B, removal of Curtis Trent and Marla Dean from active executive roles, effective immediately, subject to reassessment pending board review of long-term leadership alignment." He looked around the table, pretending this was still democratic, not a preordained autopsy. Those in favor? 6 hands went up. No hesitation. One board member, a man named Harris, who made his fortune in coffee franchises and liked to quote Sun Tzu out of context, abstained. I expected that. He never did anything that couldn't be undone. Alan nodded. Motion passes. And just like that, they were gone. No security escort, no press release, just gone. Power stripped in silence. I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be. My signature was there. My structure held. And my authority had been recognized, not with applause, but with compliance. The cleanest kind of respect. Later, someone told me Curtis showed up at the office after 5, tried to badge in, and stood there blinking at the red light like a dog at a locked door. He didn't shout, didn't bang, just stood there with a confused smirk as if the system was joking. It wasn't. The system was just finally telling the truth. The truth they'd signed, sealed, and forgotten. But I hadn't. I didn't take the chair. That was never the goal. Titles are for people who need introductions to justify their presence, and I'd already proven mine by removing 2 executives with nothing more than paper, patience, and a protocol they signed in their own arrogance. But just because I wasn't interested in wearing the crown didn't mean I was about to let the kingdom fall into another pair of unqualified hands. So I called Elise Langdon. We'd crossed paths 3 years ago during a joint project between firms. Hers a logistics consultancy that specialized in post-crisis recoveries. She had this way of speaking softly while still commanding every molecule of air in a room. No theatrics, no performative pep talks, just facts, strategy, and an uncanny ability to make even the most overinflated ego shrink without raising her voice. She flew in that same week. No entourage, no flashy announcement, just a Monday morning appearance in a simple navy suit and a lanyard that said, Temporary Operations Advisor. That's how she wanted it. Low-key, observational. Let the dust settle before anyone knew she'd been handed the keys. Within 48 hours, she'd already met with every department head, audited our largest client relationships, and quietly paused 2 contracts that were hemorrhaging funds. No mass firings, no culture reboot emails. Just a few quiet adjustments that made people breathe easier without realizing why. And they noticed. Old clients who had been reviewing their options called back and scheduled follow-ups. A vendor who'd gone radio silent after Marla's tone-deaf procurement threats sent a fresh shipment with a handwritten note saying, "Glad to be working with professionals again." Even the junior staff, the ones who used to walk on eggshells whenever Curtis entered the room, started holding conversations again. Real ones, the kind where people actually believed they'd still have a job in 6 months. The gossip stopped. The tension in the break room dissolved. People weren't whispering about slaps or suspensions anymore. They were back to whispering about project deadlines and who brought the good coffee pods. That's the thing about control. If you have to announce it, you don't really have it. Elise didn't need to slam her hand on the table or fire off performative emails at midnight. She just adjusted the tone. Slightly, sharply, permanently. She declined the permanent CEO title, by the way. Said she didn't need it. Let the board figure that out, she told me during a private debrief over green tea. I just care that the ship stops drifting. And it did. I didn't install a new tyrant. I placed a reset. Curtis had led like a man who thought noise equaled influence. Elise led like someone who understood that the loudest person in the room usually has the least power. The firm didn't need saving. It needed realignment. Less ego, more clarity. Less posturing, more structure. So no, I didn't take the corner office, but I made sure it was finally facing the right direction. I came back 2 weeks later. No fanfare, no formal announcement. I didn't need an entrance, just access. I took the service elevator. Not out of pride or drama, but because the front was crowded with visitors that day. Vendors, partners, the usual end-of-quarter bustle. I didn't feel like dodging stares or watching people scramble to remember whether they were supposed to grovel, apologize, or pretend they hadn't watched my public slap like it was halftime entertainment. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor with a soft ding. Elise was waiting at the end of the hallway with 2 coffees and a half smile that said she wasn't surprised I chose the back way in. We walked side by side, past offices that had been rearranged, past people who kept glancing at me, unsure whether to wave or hide behind their monitors. I just nodded. A quiet kind of hello, the kind that said, yes, I'm still here. Yes, it's okay. No, I didn't forget. We stopped in the kitchen. The same one where I used to refill my mug 3 times a day just to eavesdrop on the undercurrent. The gossip, the frustrations, the things you never see in a boardroom. It smelled like fresh coffee and microwave burritos. Normal. That's when a younger analyst, Jessica, I think, turned from the sink, saw me, and froze. She looked like someone who had just been caught reading your diary. We didn't know, she said, voice wobbling. I mean, we had no idea. I'm sorry. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't even necessary, but it was human. I gave her a soft smile and shook my head. You're fine. Let's just focus forward. She blinked, then nodded. That was it. I didn't give a speech, didn't gather the team for some triumphant monologue about perseverance or justice or the cost of underestimation. I didn't need to. The walls knew. The systems I'd built were humming quietly again, unburdened by panic or pretense. Elise had cleaned the operational arteries. The board had found its backbone, and the people who once dismissed me as a peripheral consultant now tilted their heads in quiet respect when I walked by, like maybe they were trying to remember if they'd ever spoken out of turn in my presence. Some avoided eye contact. Others smiled nervously. A few greeted me with cautious warmth, like they didn't know whether I came back to rebuild or to finish what I started. But I didn't come back to tear anything down. I came back to ensure it held. Because revenge is noisy, dramatic, messy. But continuity? That's power. That's ownership. When you can walk the floor you once funded from the shadows, nod at the people who thought you were gone, and see them working harder, not because they fear you, but because they finally understand who you are. There's no speech that can top that. And honestly, I never liked giving speeches anyway. About a month after the dust settled, Curtis finally reappeared, where all fallen executives go when they're trying to rebrand delusion as wisdom. LinkedIn. His profile picture was new, a little too filtered. You could tell he'd paid someone to blur the humiliation off his jawline. His headline read, Executive Advisor, Leadership Consultant, Culture Builder. Culture Builder. The same man who let his mother slap a stakeholder in front of a buffet tray and then demanded an apology like it was a loyalty test. The post itself was a classic. After an incredible journey building and scaling a fast-growing firm, I'm taking the next step, offering my experience in strategic leadership, team alignment, and operational transformation to help other businesses thrive. 3 emojis. 1 recycled photo from last year's holiday retreat. No acknowledgement of the board vote, no mention of the misconduct clause, just an airbrushed reinvention of history. But it wasn't the post that got me, it was the comment. Buried 5 rows down, left by someone who clearly knew just enough to be dangerous, was this. Rule number 1, never fire someone without reading the cap table. No emojis, no hashtags, just that. And for a second, I swear I could hear the hiss of Curtis's ego deflating somewhere across the city. I didn't respond. Didn't like it. Didn't share it. I didn't have to. Because when the truth is contractual, you don't need to scream it. It echoes in silence. It travels in whispers. It shows up in comment sections when you least expect it. Tidy, anonymous, surgical. I kept scrolling. Read a few more posts. Replied to a vendor inquiry. Signed off. No fanfare, no final word, because sometimes the most satisfying ending is no ending at all, just a quiet, unshakable truth that lives in the foundation of something others thought they built alone. They never knew who I was because they never bothered to ask. They saw what I let them see. And when they decided I was expendable, some consultant with no title, no legacy, they miscalculated the weight of my silence. The slap was loud. But my answer? It was already written. In every contract, every clause, every forgotten signature, they thought I was a nobody, but the company they stood on was mine.